In the moment when I truly understand my enemy, understand them well enough to defeat him, then in that very moment, I also love him. I think it's impossible to really understand somebody, what they want, what they believe, and not love them the way they love themselves. Orson Scott Card, Ender's Game. This is AMI Audiobook Review. I'm your host, Jacob Shymanski, and I'm with producer Ramya Amuthan today. And Rams, that quote seems cute. And it's nice. Let me read you the continuation because it completely changes everything.
Okay.
I think it's impossible to really understand somebody, what they want, what they believe in, not love them the way they love themselves. And then in the very moment that I love them, I destroy them.
Oh my. Okay.
Which is pretty fitting.
Keep
if
your
you've
friends
read
close, your
Ender's
enemies
Game.
closer.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
keep your enemies deader. Yeah, that's the sad thing with Ender's Game is that he comes to almost like respect his enemy and then unwittingly basically eradicates them.
Yeah.
And
Which
it's like
makes sense though.
one of the
Strategically.
biggest plot twists, yeah.
It's
And I'm pretty
perfect.
sure this quote comes along pretty early in the book, so it's very much like foreshadowing of the
Uh-huh.
themes of the whole first story. That I read the first book of the Ender's Game series, which is legendary at this point, but I totally get it. What a great book. One of those books that I finished and it's marinated in my head. I've let it sit and I'm like, damn, that was a good book. That was one of the best books I've read all year.
It's very, very good.
Mhm.
Such a solid for writing, for where the stories go and the plots
Concept,
go. Yeah, the concept,
themes.
exactly. It feels
Mhm.
kind of like you're in the immersive video game kind of vibe. Like the world building is great. And this is coming from me. Like I don't even read fantasy like that.
I
But
was shocked that you liked it, to
it's
be honest.
so good. Yeah, yeah. I think it's the writing, honestly. It was very invitational to the kind of everyday person, not necessarily like fantasy heads. And I just there were so many moments where I was like, "Oh, I wish I was there." You know, like the battling and the
Yeah, I want to play Zero G laser
yeah,
tag. That sounds
yeah.
awesome.
No, for real. Yeah, it was so cool. It was so immersive.
Yeah, great series. But we're actually continuing this is a part two to a conversation that we had recently. We decided that we actually had so much more to say. Last time around, we asked the book club, what's something that authors do that you absolutely love? Or you can reverse that question and say, what's something that authors don't do often enough that you wish they did more often? And we got some great answers. We did not get to nearly all of them. And I think both of us have more to add to this conversation. So where do you want to take it, Rams?
Okay, so last time we kind of ended with your thoughts on the snarky, omniscient narrator, right? And I wanted to ask you to expand on that. So first of all, reiterate what you were saying, so we give people context, and then tell us why it's something that you wish more authors did. Slash, where can we find it already? What is this
Okay.
snarky, omniscient
Okay, it's
narrator?
let me back up a bit. It's not just the snarky
Oh yeah, you're
narrator.
right. I
This
just kept putting that in
more
because it was fun.
has to do with basically the author addressing the fact that there is an author-reader relationship. Like, for example, introducing a book with "Dear readers," or even in the middle of a book just saying, "This, dear reader, is this and this and that." And it's
True.
like, it's kind of breaking the fourth wall, but it's also a situation of addressing the elephant in the room. It's a little meta, but when I've seen it, it's always made me chuckle. I've seen it in Douglas Adams' the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy,
Hmm.
who has these ridiculous tangents where he basically explains things directly to the reader, like as Douglas Adams. Like it's very meta. And Terry Pratchett is much more subtle in this case, but he's one of those authors that just his writing style itself reinforces the fact that this is an author writing for a reader, where this is what I got into a previous episode, where like the omniscient narrator in his books have so much personality, so much so that you hear the omniscient narrator and you're like, that's you, Terry, eh? I can tell that's you, Terry. That's not
You
like
wanted to put your own 2 cents in there.
it's not a person, it's not like a personality-less narrator. Like the
Hmm.
narrator himself has a lot of personality. And the line I said is, "His mighty steed was as fleet as the wind on a very calm day."
I love that.
which is the narrator himself is making a joke. And usually that would come from a character from personality, but no, just straight up the omniscient narrator. I love that stuff.
So definitely that sounds fun. I'm curious if there's the possibility of overuse of this technique. So how often is too often pulling the reader, pulling aside the curtain, breaking that fourth wall? How, you know what I mean? Like if it's done too much, then are you kind of like, okay, I get it. I'm part of the story. You're bringing me in. Or has it always been done tastefully in these examples?
You're asking me how often is too many? 7. No, I don't like. I don't know. Like it's one of those things where you kind of know it when you see it. This technique is very old school though, and from what I've seen, it's actually done fairly often at the start of chapters. Kind of this like touching base, being like, "Hey, I'm the author. You're the reader. We have a little relationship here.
Mm.
Let's keep it going." Um, but it's one of those things that you kind of know it when you see it. Like it just feels a little icky, and I'll find it funny to say that I like this type of thing, uh, because I hated Deadpool the movie because
Oh.
meta stuff kind of drives me crazy. It feels different in books because this has been like a tradition because it's old school to have these direct addresses to the reader on behalf of the author. And I can't tell you why I like this. It just makes me chuckle.
I think yeah, I think that you can like it if it's done well, and that's why I'm saying there can be, examples where this isn't done well. Unfortunately, I can't think of any right now, but, I can feel that this can be something that's, like, too much of. It's gotta be done tastefully, because if it's pulling you out too often like, for example, I had a conversation with an artist/playwright slash playwright recently for a project, and he was talking about reminding the audience that they are still an audience member and not just wrapped up in this scene before them, right? Like, so to kind of pull them out, exactly what you're describing in
Breaking the
these
fourth wall.
yeah, breaking the fourth wall. So, reminding us that, "Oh, but this is still a play. This isn't real life. You're not just sucked in. You're not being hypnotized. This just, step out for a moment, take a breather, and remember that you are an audience member, but then come right back in with me." So, I kind of, understand the idea of it, but I do think if you do it too often, then do you kind of lose it? Do you lose the audience member being wrapped up in the story?
Meta commentary in movies and plays and TV shows and music doesn't work as well as it does in books because I think books are more immersive
Mhm.
because you picture the story in in your mind's eye. It's easier to immerse yourself, and so if you get these little quips from the author that are meta, that are acknowledging that there's an author reader relationship,
Yeah.
it's less jarring than it is if you're at a play. If I'm at a play, I don't want the the performers to address me in any way. That's
Mm.
just weird. In a book, I have no problem with it.
Well, you're gonna have to talk to Tim Crouch because he disagrees completely. He thinks it's necessary, but anyway. Okay,
Fight
so
me, Crouch. I don't know who you are.
I don't know if you could take on that fight, but okay. So that's cool. That's one thing. Anything else you wanna talk about
No,
that
let's
caught your
alternate. I want to
sympathy
hear one
more?
of your
Okay,
takes.
alright. One of
What do you
my
wish?
takes. So, one thing that I love, because yesterday we talked sorry, I'm saying yesterday, but during the last episode, we talked a lot about, good dialogue, internal monologue, but I wanted to get even deeper and talk about human writing. That's the way I call it. There's probably other better ways to say it, but essentially the books that make it feel like you're talking to me, like I'm sitting down for story time, and I'm literally right now, as I'm telling you, thinking about grade 4, grade 5, grade 6, where the teacher would say, "Okay, guys, it's story time. Come on, sit down." And we all gather around on the rug, cross legged, and she'd go sit in her rocking chair and we'd be being read to. And it almost reminds me of the narration in the movie Elf, right? Where you're like just sitting there getting ready to be spoken to or
Mm.
being told a story. And I love that. This just makes me feel so comfortable, so cozy, and it feels like a real relationship that we're building right from the beginning, so I'm ready to listen. And I think that this trust when somebody writes like they talk is essential so that you can go right into it with each other, jump right into the book. Compared to, because I'll do the comparison, compared to poetic writing, beautiful writing. You talked about beautiful writing a couple of weeks ago with Karen McKay and Teresa Power. That's a really good episode. Beautiful writing, poetic writing. That writing is obviously pristine, it's gorgeous, but it's distant,
It's
right?
not human.
It's
People don't
not
talk like
human.
that. It's
People don't.
it's polished. It's very it's
Exactly.
rewritten multiple times to get to that point. It's not like an orator telling you a story masterfully.
Exactly, and, some of this might come down to the language of today, the writing of today versus, like, Shakespearean writing, because maybe that's different, right? The iambic pentameter. But I do think that, like, when I read poetic, beautiful, pristine writing, it doesn't matter what the genre is, by the way, but when I read it, I feel intimidated. Sometimes I feel like I've lost things between the lines, concepts that are too big for me to understand. Sometimes I think I've lost the point altogether. Even if I haven't, it's just the writing and the language can feel quite intimidating. So that realistic, relaxed writing where it feels like you're just talking to me, which is found in a lot of the rom-com, romanticy, just like the everyday uh type situations and scenarios feel just like, "Okay, yeah, I can go right into this."
If I recall correctly, in Herman Melville's Moby Dick, that story is being told from the perspective of just somebody in a bar telling his
Mm,
experiences on a whaling ship to their friend. And it
mhm.
always has that I'm telling you a story context to the narration. And
Yeah.
obviously you get to a point where you forget that context, but occasionally you're brought back. And that's one of those things I found kind of cool about that book. 'Cause it's just like I feel like I'm just talking to some weird old whaling guy with some crazy stories. And he goes on these like long tangents about how whales have tiny little ears. It's
Yeah.
like
Oh
that's
my
exactly the type of weird thing you would talk about with some weird sailor, you know?
exactly. You go down the side notes and the tangents and y you can feel that kind of human bonding, like, "Okay." And sometimes you're, like, not into it, but even that feels human. The only kind of exception to this, or at least the most recent exception is, and I talked about this, memoir of Kate Geese called "It Must Be Beautiful to Be Finished," which was written just in absolute poetry the entire time. Very short memoir, but
Mm.
uh, that writing was just too beautiful for me to be like, it wasn't human enough because it felt so human at the same time.
But, you know, the irony is that this human style of writing, this storytelling style of writing
Mhm.
is kind of an illusion because you know that those books are just as polished
Of
as the
course.
poetic ones. It's just written in a deliberate style to be more conversational, to be more
Yeah.
human, to be more story time y.
Yeah, but like Stephen King, for example, in It, which is a good example, we're following like 4 plus characters through long, lengthy periods of time, and he writes each character in dialogue, in internal monologue, in interaction with each other through years and flashbacks, like present day flashbacks. But he does so much human writing in that book. You're just kind of always following stories being told to you in first person. And he flips back and forth so well. And it's not the only example. Stephen King does this excellently, but it never feels like you're kind of distancing yourself from a character because they're always pulling you in with just who they are.
Okay, so Ben Iverson, one of our listeners, actually responded to one of our questions. What he has to say is loosely tied to this conversation here.
Mm.
He says, I'm not sure how to express this exactly, but I love when authors don't shy away from exposition. To me, that sounds like the unpoetic style of writing, to be
Yeah.
honest. He says, I often find exposition to be the most compelling parts of a book because all it is new relevant information. I wonder if sometimes authors take the writing advice, show, don't tell, a little too much to heart. And in those cases, all the important information you need to know what's going on are buried in layers of implication. Okay, this is really
Okay.
interesting to me, uh, because if you're writing poetically, you kind of have to decipher everything. That's kind of the nature of poetry. It's more about the feeling of it than just being clear. You
Yes.
could say, character A is character B's brother, or you could just say that like directly, or you could make an implication that they're brothers, and you just kind of have to pick up on it, like just something
It's more
subtle.
subtle. Yeah.
Instead of saying they are siblings, these two people are siblings, there could be a dialogue tag or like an inner monologue saying like my my sibling was always problematic in this way. It's a little bit more subtle. It's you could easily miss it if you're not paying attention.
Which lends itself, right, to certain, kinds of writing. Like,
Mm.
I've listened to some mystery and investigation and crime novels, like fiction crime novels, that still feel poetic. Like, the writing is more, arm's length, if you will. Like, they're not gonna let you in
They're
truly.
not babying you.
Yes, and you're not really getting inside characters' heads. You're just kind of following along, to the story, not necessarily the rationale.
Mm.
Is that what we're kinda getting at here?
The way I'm understanding it is that this is about not shying away from just telling the reader what the hell is going on, like much more directly. And I think about this in fantasy, in explaining magic systems or
Yes.
explaining like the organizational structure of an army. You could say an army is big, but then you're like, okay, how big are we talking about? Like like a platoon of 100 soldiers,
Sure.
or like through like after reading 20 chapters, you're like, okay, I'm getting the picture that this army is actually like maybe 2,000 or so soldiers. Now I can picture what the army looks like in my mind's eye. Or right off the bat, you could have been like, character X was part of platoon B of 200 men.
Ugh.
The army
Mm.
was composed of four
Nope.
platoons. Why not? I like
No.
that
No, no,
stuff.
no,
At
no.
least I can actually picture what's going on. It's not very poetic, but I like that. I
Understood. You're
really
now
agree with that
talking about,
almost.
like, a history book type writing. So, The Woman by Kristen Hanna, to me, it explained everything. Yes, there's a lot of the clarification, the exposition, but it wasn't all fed to you at the start. We knew that we were getting into the realm of the Vietnam War. We knew that we were getting into the depth of it, but it wasn't all fed to you at the start. Sometimes pacing matters too, right? Like, you gotta kind of slow things down, give us bits and pieces to keep it interesting. If you wanted to know about the Vietnam War and women's part in it, like, on a factual level, you just go read that, like, read an article, read an essay.
That's fair. That's fair. I don't think you want to dump too much information on the reader right away.
It's
Um,
still storytelling, right? And let's talk about, like, good storytelling even just between the 2 of us. Like, if I come to you and I give you the X, Y, and Z right off the top and start telling you spitting out the facts, it's not really interesting. And maybe that's why the poetic is still, like, such a great technique because there's a lot of mystery in poetry, like you said, and interpretation.
it's more deliberate, right?
Mhm.
Time and place. Time and place for different writing styles. I have
Yeah.
noticed that in very militaristic fantasy books, they tend to be much more like, descriptive, like just show a little bit of exposition as to
Mhm.
how things work on like a logistical level, which like sure, it's not super relevant, but it's also like, oh, I can picture that. Like
Yeah.
that sounds kind of cool. They do it in Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. You know exactly how the school operates, like down to the hour. And I'm like, I like that because I want to picture myself at that school.
Also, like, for example, I talked about pacing just slightly, but if you're kind of going through a slower paced part of the book and then you get to a nice, juicy, action oriented scene, like in Ender's Game or Deception Point is another book that I'm thinking of, where you get to this part where you're like, it's ramping up. That might be a great spot to ironically, add in more details, right? Add in the details about the equipment, about the personnel, about how many people are showing up to this fight, like that kind of thing is intriguing. And then you're kind of dumping detail, which could be helpful.
You don't need to dump detail. You can sprinkle it in.
Yeah.
Ideally, that's the best way to do it. But I'm just realizing something. Brianna Hong also wrote to us, and what she has to say directly ties into this conversation about like
Hmm.
world building and details and stuff like that. She says, can't believe how relevant this is. Embrace negative space in world building. World building isn't just about the author coming up with the world. They also have to write it down compellingly. And so often writers just don't show restraint. This is the exact opposite of Ben, now that I'm realizing.
Yeah.
Uh, she says, hint at ancient wars, off screen empires, or half remembered myths. Let me fill in the blanks instead of reading a tourism brochure masquerading as chapter one.
Exactly. Exactly. I totally agree with you there. I totally agree. I think that there's got to be, you said it, sprinkled. There's got to be a sprinkling of detail and relevance, no matter how key it might be. And part of that is just like the planning of the author, right? How they went in, when they wanted to sprinkle which type of detail. It doesn't have to be all dumped in. I've said this before on the show. I really detest when books start off with like pages and pages of description before we get into anything. I'd rather the complete opposite. Just dump me right in to the situation, whatever insane thing that's going on, dump me right in and then fill me in later.
I'm thinking of The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, the
In the
short
short
story.
story. Yeah.
And in that book, you don't know
You
anything.
don't know anything.
You
Even
don't
by
know.
the end, you barely know what's going on.
Yes, but the story is so compelling because you don't know what's going
That's
on.
right.
It just wouldn't work. But in this case, this is not a world building thing. It's directly tied to the plot of the book. And world building is not telling a story. World building is developing a setting
Yeah.
for the story to take place in. So I think it's important
Agreed.
to to make that distinction. Um, People who read sci-fi and fantasy love setting. It's a very important thing to us, and you kind of necessarily need exposition. And I think I know where Ben is coming at this when he talks about like not shying away from exposition. It's just giving people what they want. Tell me about this world. Tell me about what makes it cool. What's cool about it? Because like this
Yeah,
is part of the huge. It's a huge part of why we picked up the book in the first place.
but that's what I was just gonna say. Directly for fantasy readers, you need the world. The world is a big part of why you're even reading this type of book in the first place.
Yeah,
Whereas if I'm picking up a psych thriller, I don't necessarily need to know all that. There's different reasons why I'm being pulled into the book. Girl on the Train by I can't remember her name right now, but everybody knows her. Um, Girl on the Train, it's you know, 90% of the book takes place with this girl on this train in this mindset. And she's got so much memory gap and she doesn't even know what's going on half the time. There's some random dude maybe following her, but it is so compelling. And, brilliant writers can do that where you can take a train and that's the setting and there's not much detail going on other than maybe is it daytime? Is it nighttime? Is it raining? Does she get on the train okay? Did she get off the train? Did she trip? And, like, that's all we're working with. But there's an intense story going on, and there's lots of days and nights being captured.
Angus Holmes also wrote into us. Maybe one last one before we wrap up here.
Mhm.
I melt when an innocuous trinket in chapter 2 suddenly detonates the plot in chapter 20. That payoff makes me feel like the author's been winking at me the whole time.
Oh, I
Uh,
love that. Yes.
Angus, what you're describing is Chekhov's gun. This concept that in storytelling, not just books and literature, plays and movies and everything should be relevant. Do not introduce a gun unless you plan on that gun going off later on. There's no
Hmm.
point. Everything should be relevant. And uh, this goes into something that I often talk about is this feeling of being in good hands. Don't make me read stuff that doesn't matter, that isn't
Oh.
relevant to the story to me. Everything that I'm reading should be relevant in the future to the plot. Make this a tight, concise thing. Everything should be relevant.
I love that.
Hmm.
Yeah, I really respect that because it's true.
Hmm.
You're talking about that trust with the author. I will
Hmm.
throw in something in here for irony, though, before we go, which
Yeah.
is that when you distrust the author, when the author
Yes.
deliberately makes you feel like you shouldn't trust him or her, I love this too. And I'm talking not even forget the fiction stuff. I'm talking about nonfiction. So memoirs that I've read over the years: Will by Will Smith, Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing, Matthew Perry, More Myself, Alicia Keys, and many more. Even though they're memoirs, even though they're celebrities, these are huge names, and they're obvious nonfiction memoir storytelling. There are deliberate moments in these books where the author is pushing you out from this idea that they are telling you the truth, they're pleading you to believe them, and they're saying, should you trust me? Should you trust what I'm saying here? Does this follow my story
That's
and the kind of
wild.
impression? And yeah, it is so wild, and I love it because it's a huge brave act for the author to do that to us in a memoir, to say, but I don't know. I don't know if you should believe me here. And it's very, very impressive because it kind of makes us, the reader, have to step out and not just like believe the nonsense.
Unreliable narrators are popular in
Yep.
like literary fiction.
Yep.
This is just an unreliable narrator in nonfiction, meaning there's just a real person who's
Yeah.
just unreliable as a person,
Unreliable. Or,
and
like
that's
you
humans.
gotta question Will Smith, even if you're a diehard fan, because he wanted to, push his dad down the stairs or whatever.
Facts. Wait, really?
Yeah.
Anyways, let's not explore that. Ramya, thank you so much for coming on. I feel like we could do a part three.
Yeah,
We'll see.
maybe.
We'll talk about it
Maybe.
later. Have a
All
good
right.
one.
You too.
That was producer Ramya Amuthan. We were going through questions from the book club asking, what do you wish authors would do more often? We also had a part one if you want to scroll back in our episodes to find that one. That's all the time we have for this edition of AMI Audiobook Review. AMI Audiobook Review airs weekends at 1 p.m. Eastern on AMI Audio and repeats every 6 hours. But we also make ourselves easy to find. We're on all the big podcasting platforms, and that includes YouTube. You can email us your feedback at audiobookreview@ami.ca. That's at audiobookreview@ami.ca. You can also follow us on Instagram at AMI Audiobook Review. That's at AMI Audiobook Review for our Instagram handle. I'm Jacob Shymanski. Happy listening.